Awesome. Okay, so for today, essentially the agenda for today is going to be going over a cool tip for learning and teaching yourself critical reasoning and making sure that when you're by yourself, when you're alone and you are attempting to reason your way through why it is you get a question wrong, there's a way that you can practice critical reasoning, and it's using the LSAT. And after that, we're going to do some cars, and then some physics or bio, whichever one I decide. And after that, we're going to take some questions. But before we jump into that, I was talking to somebody via Reddit. He sent me a message, and it was a really nice post. You know, I told them to kind of follow up with me, whatever score they get, and they ended up getting a 520. And I said, that's fantastic. You know, thank you for letting me know. What was it that really, that you really did that you think helped you? And he said, basically, I can read you exactly what he wrote, and it's really cool. I think that would be nice for me to share with you guys. The message was basically this. He said, practice tests. I took a total of 7 full lengths. I used 3 Altius tests and did each AAMC test twice. Took the test and then went and corrected all the wrong answers and wrote about why I got each answer wrong and repeated this a few times. So that's exactly what you need to be doing. So I wrote back to him exactly. Practice is one thing, analysis is another. It's all about what people do after they practice that really separates the top 10 from the bottom 90. So guys, when you're practicing and you take tests, everybody tells you, you got to take full-length tests, you got to take full-length tests, but you have to ask yourselves, why is it that taking full-length tests is somehow the most efficient way of studying? Why? Because if you just practice and don't do anything else afterwards, you're not going to grow. You have to make sure that the next step after you practice is analysis. And this is the key step in almost every single student's case. Analysis is the key step, because if you and I, if all 10 of us, I mean, there's like about a dozen people on this class right now, if all 12 of us take the same full-length test and we all go over it ourselves individually, we're all going to have different analyses. So the point is that the process with which you do this is so crucial. I mean, listen to this guy who got a 520. He said that he went and corrected all the wrong answers and wrote a reason next to each answer he got wrong as to why he got that wrong, so that he started to build good habits and good strategies over time. That is appropriate analysis. So really keep that in mind, guys, okay? It's a nice tip. All right, so now I want to show you guys a link that you can all kind of copy. I can send it in the, I can send it to you in the chat. So the LSAT, it's you know, law school admissions test. Basically, this test is going to you have, I think, 4. So it has 4 sections on it. 3 of the sections are unique. 1 of them is a repeat. And so the 3 sections are basically like, you have logic games, you have passage-based questions just like cars, and you have like reasoning questions. So I kind of wanted to briefly, not this one, I wanted to kind of briefly test you guys with a couple of these questions here, just so that you understand that whenever the MCAT says choose the best answer, there really is a skill to be taught there. It's not just something that's up to luck or guessing. You can actually really teach yourself what is it that mean, what does it mean to choose a best answer. So let's just kind of go over just the first question here, and then we'll head into an MCAT passage, and you guys can do this on your own time. So the directions here basically say that the questions in this section are based on the reasoning contained in brief statements or passages, just like this. For some of the questions, more than one of the choices could conceivably answer the question. However, you are to choose the best answer. That is, the response that most accurately and completely answers the question. You should not make assumptions that are, by common sense standards, implausible, superfluous, or incompatible with the passage. After you have chosen the best answer, blacken the blah, 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 blah. Okay, so let's read this in our heads real quick. Okay, so it's a little confusing at first, I'll admit, but essentially, again, what we're doing here is we're trying to test our skills at critical reasoning here, and the question's asking which one of the following most accurately expresses the main conclusion of the economist's argument. And the reason why this applies so well to the MCAT is because this is essentially the most important question to know about every single CARS passage. If you can identify an accurate expression of the main conclusions of the whatever author's argument, that's essentially half the battle. So even in these couple of sentences, it still gets a little bit confusing, but what do you guys think the answer is? Take about a minute or so to kind of answer and really see if you can get the right answer. And if you can get the right answer, then you can get into law school. Okay, Walter says B. Sandra says B also. I'll let a couple other people answer. And then if anybody wants to okay, so if anybody wants to unmute themselves and kind of explain to us why they think it's B, that'd be awesome. Because I believe the answer is B. Josh also says B. So yeah, we look over here. So section 2B, yeah. So you guys got it right. Anybody want to explain why, their reasoning behind why it's B? Okay, Walter is at the library, so he can't explain it. Okay. Sandra, Bianca, Josh, you guys want to explain briefly what your logic was behind B? Last sentence. Okay. So Josh says the last sentence, often attempts to increase productivity decrease the number of employees, which clearly harms the dismissed employees as well as the sense of security of the retained employees. So what about this last sentence tells you that the main conclusion is B? Because it is B, that's the right answer, but why? That's the question. Why is it B? Walter, why does it capture his main idea? Okay. So awesome. So you caught the shift in tone, and that's really what I was hoping you would say. So guys, remember the cars strategy. In order to find the main argument, to really understand what position somebody's taking in an argument, look for the shifts in tone. So if you look at this cars strategy checklist, there is, in number 2, it says, did I circle or highlight the shifts in tone? The reason why, if you find the shifts in tone, you can find the main argument is because there's a certain structure in which all arguments, well, not I would say all arguments, but I've found that there's a certain pattern that arguments are laid out with. So for example, an author or anybody will give you context first. They'll tell you sort of the popular belief of the time or of the certain topic. They're going to lay out some context, and then they're going to say something that contradicts the popular belief. You know, it could be highlighted by a word like but, or however, or although, or yet, or it could be more subtle, like, you know, the above sentence is a myth, or something that contradicts the previous few statements. So in this circumstance, yeah, there was, you know, every business strives to increase its productivity, for this increases profits for the owners and the likelihood that the business will survive. So that's the context. That's sort of a popular belief about this topic. And then the shift in tone, but not all efforts to increase productivity are beneficial to the business as a whole. Okay? That's essentially what B is saying. And the reason why we can now conclude that that's the argument is because as soon as the shift in tone occurs, the thing that happens after the shift in tone is why the popular belief is wrong. It's the main argument. So it's a really cool way of looking at argument structures, and once you kind of apply this to a broader passage, like over here, these cars passages, you'll realize that it's the same pattern. It's the same pattern as with this small paragraph as it is with the bigger cars passages. So really, guys, really try and copy this down, this structure of arguments, because I'm telling you, once you start to study this and you start to break down every passage that you perform, that you practice, you're going to start to see these patterns. So once the shift in tone occurs, then the author will explain his or her main argument. And if you have a passage, then the rest of the passage will be made up of evidence, so basically why, you know, the author's belief is right, and then a conclusion which basically repeats the popular belief and how it's wrong. So this structure might repeat itself a couple times in a passage, or it might just happen once. But the point is that the chronological order of arguments tends to be in this pattern. So that's the underlying lesson there. And in order to practice identifying main arguments, definitely check out this link. It's really fun, and it's a nice mental break from the MCAT, although it tests the same skills. So something I wanted to share with you guys. Okay. All right, so knowing that, you're going to go downstairs to the ground level so you can participate better? Okay, thanks, Walter. Sounds great. Yeah, knowing that this is the structure of arguments, or that this is a nice framework you guys can use to help you understand passages more, let's take this framework here and let's apply it to a cars passage. Now, remember that in order to really identify where you're at in the passage, look for the shift in tone. If you can find the shift in tone, you'll be able to realize where you're at in the passage, what part of the argument structure you're at. So with cars, what I normally do, this is the strategy that I promote, is essentially to read the passage fully, assuming that you guys have, you know, time during your actual MCAT test. Read the full passage and then come down to all the questions and try to answer them then. So when you're reading the passage, do two things. Read it with some emotion. You know, don't read it with monotone, because a lot of times it makes it more difficult for you to remember things when there's no emotion tied to it. So if you can kind of pretend that this passage is your script and that you're an actor or actress, read it like that. Read it with some, read it theatrically. It'll help you, it'll help things stick more to you. And the second strategy is, again, to kind of highlight the shift in tone. So whenever you find something that you see that seems to be something like a contradictory statement, just keep a note of it. Now, some passages might not have any shift in tone. For those passages, they'll be more factual, but that happens very few and far between. Most of the passages in Cars are argumentative. So let's see if that is the case with this passage. So now you come down, you see the title says Confucius, the Secular as Sacred, from 1972. So you know something about Confucius. So we scroll up to the top here and go ahead and let's just read this passage together in our heads. And I'll scroll down. We can finish it up and knock out the questions. Good luck, everybody. Okay, is everybody for the most part done reading, or do we need some more time? It's a bit of a doozy. Please let me know if anybody's not done.
What? Can't hear anyone else.
Okay. All right. So now what I want you guys to type out, or to just, if it's, I think it's faster to just kind of talk it out on the phone, is what you think the main idea is, and number two, where the shift or shifts in tone were, if anywhere. Anybody want to go ahead and take a crack at that? Sandra, Sharon, Bianca, did you guys want to take a crack at what you think the main idea is? Okay, so you can take 30 seconds, but I'm definitely expecting somebody to kind of relay to the class what they think about this passage. So Pyle, thank you. She says, main idea, why magic is helpful / good, and magic, oh, no worries. I'm sorry? Rituals can be critical, not just a response. Okay, I see where you're coming from. So here's what would be helpful for you guys to wrap your heads around it, because I know that understanding the main idea is one thing, but being able to express it is another. But we really need to get in the habit of doing this because it's important. Okay. Let's see. So Sandra says, the Li is a human characteristic that is superior to force in getting something done, and that it is almost magical in the sense that how you express something can make something happen without you doing much. Okay, very nice. Walter says, Confucius promotes Li, which is magical because it respects people. So already we have 3 interpretations. I think it's going to be interesting to get some more interpretations from Josh, Bianca, Sharon. You guys kind of chime in, because you'll start to see how we all read the same passage, and yet there are similarities between our interpretations, and yet there are differences. So Sharon says, the power of Li / ceremony / action in life versus language. Okay. Okay. So I think that guys, when we're thinking about the main idea of a passage, essentially what this statement should be, for example, if you're going to write out the main idea on a piece of paper to somebody who's never read the passage, right? It's a couple sentences of, in my opinion, this is how I would describe it. So what you would do is you would look at the structure of an argument right here, okay? And in order to get the main idea in a nice statement, you essentially want to provide a little bit of context, provide the shift in tone, and then provide the main argument. So it's like, I think that Sandra, you're pretty close, but I would say that when it comes to the main idea, it's like you want to make sure that you understand what the author or what kind of popular beliefs the author was fighting against, and then you want to talk about what they believe instead to be true. So in this case, reading at the beginning, Confucius saw that the truly distinctively human powers have blah, blah, blah magical quality. His task, therefore, required in effect that he reveal what is already so familiar and universal as to be unnoticed. So what does that mean? What did these first two sentences mean? Basically, it's a fancy way of saying that there are things that we can do without us even noticing it that are pretty awesome. Okay, so what is necessary in such cases is that one come upon this obvious dimension of our existence in a new way, in the right way. Okay, that's a very powerful word to use, in the right way. Confucius found the path. We go by way of the notion of Li. So essentially, this is the context, yeah? So the context right here is basically telling us that that basically there are things again that we can do that are awesome that we don't really notice. And so in order to explain these things, Confucius said we should go by way of Li. So now the next question is, what is Li? Okay, we'll keep reading. So one has to labor long and hard to learn Li. The word in its root meaning is close to holy ritual or sacred ceremony. So characteristic of Confucius's teaching is the use of the language and imagery of Li as a medium within which to talk about the entire body of the authentic tradition and reasonable conventions of society. So if you guys want to tie this into behavioral psychology, behavioral sciences, this is really like sociology, except Confucius's little spin on it. It's basically sociology, yeah? They're trying to think about the underlying invisible forces that cause people and society to kind of move fluidly without really much conscious choice. So he's talking about the reasonable conventions of society. He's talking about, unnoticed powers. All of this is sort of like a study of Li. Okay, so that's helpful to look at. I don't really feel any main shifts in tone yet. I mean, if you guys have found any shifts in tone, let me know. But so far, he's just basically saying that there are things that we don't notice, sort of invisible forces, and that to study these things, we go by way of the notion of Li. That's sort of the study of these invisible forces, okay? This is my interpretation, at least. Confucius characteristically and sharply contrasts the ruler who uses Li with the ruler who seeks to attain ends by means of commands and threats and regulations and punishment and force. Okay, so the force of coercion is manifest and tangible, whereas the vast and sacred forces at work in Li are invisible and intangible. Li works through spontaneous coordination rooted in reverent dignity. The perfection in holy rite is aesthetic as well as spiritual. Okay, so this is where Sandra hit the nail on the head. So I think it was Sandra, yeah. Basically contrasting how Confucius contrasts the ruler who uses Li, basically the invisible forces that guide people and behavior, with a ruler who uses force and coercion to get things done. And then the author goes on to explain the effortless power of Li, right? Basically, you want somebody to go and do something for you, so you can just tell them to do it, and then, aha, the book is in your hands. You don't need to force them or anything. So it's a pretty interesting way of looking at communication as a way of getting things done. Okay, then this paragraph, the notion that we can use speech only to talk about action has dominated Western thought. Here's the first shift in tone that I found. But essentially, I guess they're kind of interspersed throughout, here and there. So contemporary linguistic analysis in philosophy has revealed increasingly how much the ritual word itself is itself the critical act rather than the report of or stimulus to action. It's a little bit verbose. So what is this basically saying over here, guys? So linguistic analysis in philosophy has revealed increasingly how much the ritual word is itself the critical act rather than a report of or stimulus to action. The philosopher Austin brought the reality and pervasiveness of this phenomenon to a focus in his analyses of what he called the performative utterance. These are the innumerable statements we make which function somewhat like the operative clause in a legal instrument. They are the very execution of the act itself. Okay, so essentially just sort of reiterating the same thing in the previous paragraph, how the words itself, they provide some sort of invisible forces that get things to happen. Okay, I give and bequeath my watch to my brother. Duly said or written is not a report of what I have already done, but it's the very act of bequeathal itself. It is by words and by the ceremony of which the words form a part that I bind myself in a way which for someone ever turning to Lee is more powerful and more escapable than strategies of force. So the fact that this person says, I give and bequeath my watch to my brother, is the very act itself of giving and bequeathing his watch to his brother. Again, supporting the same thing as the first few paragraphs before that. The central lesson of these insights is not so much a lesson about language as it is about ceremony. Okay? What we have come to see in our own way is how vast is the area of human existence in which the substance of that existence is the ceremony. Okay? Everybody understand what that means? What we have come to see in our own way is how vast the area of human existence in which the substance of that existence is the ceremony. Promises, commitments, excuses, pleas, compliments, pacts, these and so much more are ceremonies, or they are nothing. Okay. So, after reading that, you might say a couple things, right? The popular belief is that words are words, you know, they don't really cause any action or force. You can't really feel them. But the author is arguing against that, promoting a bunch of support and evidence, which is all this is, a bunch of support and evidence to say that, hey, no, words are much more powerful than you think. There's an invisible force that they kind of control. So that's basically the main argument of the passage. And so having gone over that passage and understood what the main argument is, let's all kind of do the questions in our head now, and we'll go over the questions at the end. So here we go. Here's the first couple questions. And just keep in mind that when you're answering these questions, try to make sure that you're giving your own answer first. So you're making your own answer choice E, and then a couple bullet points for whatever you think the answer would be. And then you use that answer choice E to arm yourself while answering, while determining whether or not A, B, C, or D are strong or weak. So you look at answer choice A and you see, is it strong or is it weak as compared to E? And then before you cross it off, just compare it to answer choice B and see whichever one is stronger, B or A, will remain, and whichever one's weaker, you'll cross off, and so on and so forth. So just remember to do that, guys, and then we'll go over it. Good luck. Okay. Did everybody get the first two questions? What do you guys think the answers to the first two questions are? Walter says D and A. Yeah, that's what I got too. Anybody else agree, disagree, D and A? Yep, Sandra, you got D and A as well. Agreed? Okay, great. Yep, that's what I got too. So let's keep going. Then we'll go over at the end. Sharon and Josh, you guys, hopefully you're with us. B and D, we're almost speaking 10 minutes. Yeah. Okay. So here's question number 3. Whenever you get the answer, just type them in. Sandra got A. Yep, that's what I got too. Because again, it goes back to the main idea of how basically words are some sort of an invisible force. So power behind ordinary social conventions is basically the same as saying invisible force. So I would agree that it's A. Okay. If we're going too fast for anybody, please just tell us to go back and we'll explain. Here's question number 4. Performative utterances. Let's see. Is that what everybody else got? B? Yeah, okay. Because remember, performative utterances are something that's like binding, like I bequeath my watch or something. So, good job. Question number 5. Sandra got A. That's what I got too. Everybody else agree or disagree? A? Okay, great. This last question, I'd like to hear from, Sharon, Josh, you guys kind of throw out your answers for this last question here. What you think it is. Pyle as well. Please chime in. What do you guys think? Kyle, you said A. Sharon, Josh, you guys want to chime in? Anybody else? This one's probably the hardest one on here. Yeah, Sandra's between C and D. Walter thinks it's C. Okay, so a little bit of Josh thinks it's C. Bianca thinks it's D. Okay, let's break it down then. That's funny. First of all, first step, provide your own answer choice. So what does Austin's concept of performative utterances imply about language? First question I have for y'all, what is a performative utterance? Performative utterance is something that you say that is the action itself, correct? If you guys don't believe me, remember the concept MSLR. My answer, well, I'm going to attempt to have all my answers have the most support and least rationalization. So my support is right here. So the words are the very act itself. So that is basically what a performative utterance is. Okay, so that's my answer choice E. It's that words are the acts themselves. So what does it imply about language? Probably that words are the acts themselves. Make sense? So Josh, Walter, good job. You guys got that one. And then, yeah, so between C and D, what was, Bianca, Sandra, what was it that you guys were struggling with between C and D? And also, Pyle, what was it that led you to A, so that we can understand? Why is it that you guys got the question wrong? Which is totally okay. Okay, so Sandra needs some clarification from the passage. Okay, good. Bianca, Pyle, same. Okay. So after going up to that part of the passage where it says that, awesome. So we already gotten it. Fantastic. Okay, now let's check the answers again. D-A-A-B-A-C. D-A-A-B-A-C. Yeah, that's basically what we all got. D-A-A-B-A-C. Okay, fantastic. So now let's say you guys are by yourselves, right? You guys are studying by yourself, and you just, knocked out a few CARS passages, okay? So that's part of practice. Now what you want to do is you want to go ahead and you want to analyze this passage. So remember at the beginning I told you about this guy from Reddit who got a 520 and said that basically what he did was he went back through all of the passages that he got answers wrong for, and he corrected those mistakes and he wrote down why he got those things wrong. So essentially, it's nice to say that, but it's so difficult to understand why you get something wrong. So I've made a strategy checklist here that you guys have seen before, most of you. So when you look at this checklist, this will help guide you with questions throughout your analysis so that you're not lost. So these are 6 big reasons why you would have gotten a question wrong. If you didn't read it with emotion, that would have made it more difficult to read the passage. You might have missed something. If you didn't circle or highlight the shifts in tone, you might have missed the main argument. Did you pay attention to question stems? Like in this case, the question stems, for example, like the question that I answered for you guys right here, right? These are all different parts of the question. So when I'm approaching a problem, I have this realization that problems require questions to be solved. So every single problem has a set of 1 or 2 or 3 questions that you must ask yourself in order to be able to solve the problem. because your brain can't really answer a problem, but it can answer questions. So every time that the MCAT gives you what you think is a question, most likely it's actually a problem, and it's your job to pull out the relevant questions. So in this case, what does Austin's concept of performative utterances apply about language? There's really only one question that you have to pull out, and that is, what is a performative utterance? And if you know the answer to that question, you'll be able to solve the problem. The same thing is with biology, physics, chemistry, any real problem on the MCAT. They have this sets of sub-questions that you must know the answers to first in order for you to get a nice set of crystal clear solutions to your problem. And this set of crystal clear solutions is what makes up your answer choice E for every single problem. Does that make sense? So if you're going back over the passages, whatever section it's in, and you find out that, you skipped that step, you didn't really understand what the problem was asking you, well then when you're going over it, make sure that you go over it and you try to extract every single question that you need to know about this problem, so that you can then, you'll be able to come up with a solution at that point. So a lot of times people will ask me, hey, I got stuck with this problem, and my first question is, well, where did you get stuck? So for example, if we go to a science passage, or even over here, for example, you're reading according to the passage, which of the following sentences. So at this point, you've read this many words over here, and you're not stuck yet. Your brain is able to follow it along. And so you keep reading this performative utterance says, now your brain is stuck. Well, where does your brain get stuck? Right here. So wherever your brain gets stuck, you have to turn that into a question. So over here, if your brain got stuck at performative utterances, why did it get stuck? Because you don't know what are performative utterances. And that's how I approach every problem if it's not straightforward, which in the MCAT, almost none of them are straightforward. So I'm basically going word by word, and I'm stopping at the point where my brain is like, wait a minute, what? And at that point where my brain's like, wait a minute, what? I realize that I just have to turn that into a question, go back up to the passage, pull up the answer, and go back down and solve the problem. So just keep that in mind. And just so you don't forget, that's basically what number 3 and number 4 is saying. Did you pay attention to the question stem, and did you come up with an answer choice E? Okay, so once you've done that, let's say you've done all these different things, and yet you still get the questions wrong. Yeah, I'm glad that helps, Walter. It definitely is an interesting concept. It's the difference between problems and questions, that people tend to blend them together. Like, for example, if I was your friend and I came up to you guys and I was like, hey, I have a problem. There's a bunch of noise outside or upstairs, or there's a bunch of bad guys outside my door, right? You can't just simply answer me like, oh, do this, right? You need more context. You need to know, well, who are they? Do you have your phone nearby? Can you call the cops? Is there a window? Is there a fire escape? There's so many different questions that you need to ask yourself in order for your brain to comprehend the overall problem. And it's no different in the MCAT. It's no different when you're a doctor. It's no different in real life. You're going to be faced with problems, and a good problem solver, all a good problem solver does is identify the gaps in your knowledge, identify the areas that confuse them, and they simply systematically go one by one and ask questions about every single gap in their knowledge in an attempt to understand what the overall problem is really requiring of them. So please make sure you understand that concept, because problem solving is problem solving. Whether it's the LSAT, the MCAT, or relationships, or the real world, it's the same approach. You break it down into the things that you can ask questions to, and then you can systematically go one by one and answer all those questions. So definitely pay attention to that. The strategy number 5. So Bianca says, my issue usually with cars is that I'm able to narrow it down to 2 answers, and then sometimes I choose the wrong one. When I get to this stage, what should be my next move to make sure I choose the best answer? MSLR? Yeah, but it's actually a perfect segue into step number 5. So in order to use MSLR effectively, it must be between two choices. So that's your problem, right? You've gotten to the point where you have two choices. So over here, right, let's take a real example. So I think a couple of you were in between choice C and choice D. And so if you look over choice C and choice D real quick, so first of all, you've come up with over here, answer choice E. Our answer choice E over here was essentially, performative utterances equal words plus action, right? So that's essentially our answer to this question of what this concept of performative utterances imply about language. So we've done this step, and we've gone over here to answer choice A, and we're like, compare A to B. Which one, is A stronger than B? Let's see, language has no direct relationship to actions. That is definitely the opposite of what we think, right? So it's definitely weaker than B because it has a direct support of it being the exact opposite of what is true. B is a little bit more ambiguous, right? Language is sometimes used to conceal facts. It's a lot of rationalization that we have to use in order to really tell ourselves that this is right. But A is definitely wrong, so we're crossed off A. Now let's look at B versus C. C says language and actions can be inseparable. Well, that's basically the same thing over here, words plus action. So is C stronger than B? Yes. The reason why C is stronger than B is because it has the most support and it has the least rationalization. Remember, with B, we're rationalizing a lot, so we can cross off B now. Now we do C versus D, which is where you guys were all at. Language is necessary for social conventions. Okay, so the thing that you want to look at here is if you were to follow the strategy perfectly, it should still be pretty clear to you, Bianca, that C is the stronger answer here. But my guess is that you didn't really do this. Because if you had done that, then it would have been like, oh yes, which one has the most support in this rationalization? It's MSLR as compared to your answer choice E. It's not MSLR as compared to the rest of the passage because, again, if you're following steps 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., you've already broken down the problem and you've already answered what you think is the answer to this question. So what might have happened, Bianca, is you might have seen answer choice D, and you might have seen it and it said language is necessary for social conventions. That is something that is discussed in the passage, sure, but as it relates to the question, it's not at all supported, right? It's too much rationalization as compared to C. So my answer to you would be yes, you want to use MSLR, but realize that MSLR is one part of a larger process of problem solving that if you apply all 6 of these strategies to your overall process of problem solving, then you should be able to use MSLR effectively. However, if you skipped some of these things along the way, then you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot by using these strategies separately. You can't separate them. You have to look at them as an overall process together. So Bianca says, yes, right away D looks like a good answer, but then when I looked further, C definitely fits better. And again, the reason why it fits better is because as compared to answer choice E, it has the most support in least rationalization. So really the hardest part of problem solving, guys, is this step right here, is coming up with answer choice E. Because answer choice E is supposed to be your guide for how to eliminate answer choices. You should never have to go back up to the passage. Does that make sense? Like if you are really approaching these problems accurately, you should never have to go back to the passage because then that tells me that there's some weak point in the beginning. Like when you read the passage, there's some weak point. You either didn't read it with emotion, you didn't understand the shifts in tone, you didn't pay attention to the question stem. If you can't do number 4, it's probably because of somewhere before in the process you're weak. There's a weak point there. And so when you're analyzing these passages, remember that this whole thing is part of a process of problem solving, that it's like a chain. Any missing link, you can have 5 out of 6 links there, but one link is missing, the whole chain falls apart. Okay, so that hopefully answers your question as to how to overcome between 2 answer choices, is to make sure that your whole process is perfect and that you use MSLR and compare the 2. So, okay. I think that's enough of cars, in my opinion. So, I think Pyle, you wanted physical sciences. Let's try and see if we can find one. Oops. Okay. There we go. Physical sciences. So we have one here. I think I remember doing a couple of these problems with some of you. I don't think I ever finished the passage fully. So this would be a good one to kind of go over. It's kind of a mixture of bio and physics, so that'll compromise nicely with you guys. Okay. So with everything but cars, the strategy is again to read one paragraph at a time. So you just read this, and then you'd attempt to answer the first question. And if you can answer the first question, then go on to the second question. If you can't answer the second question, then prime yourself by reading through the answers and trying to understand what the problem is asking you. Why? Because if you understand what the problem is asking of you, then you're going to prime yourself. You're going to be able to really, really read proactively for the rest of the passage, because you're going to be looking for the answer in the passage. It's so much more efficient this way. So that's the strategy. Yep, so let's go ahead and knock it out. So first step is to read the title. Over here it says essential roles of zinc ligation and dimerization for catalysis in the amino acylase family. So zinc ligation, dimerization, catalysis, and then amino acylase. So if you guys don't know what those terms mean, then what's going to happen is when we analyze this passage, we're going to be dropping these terms into our study bucket, which you can see on my website, SecondChanceMCAT.com. Go under resources, and you'll be able to pull up that study bucket. So you'll be able to drop them in there, and we'll go over that at the end. So, okay, so over here. So for now, we read this title, zinc ligation, enzyme dimerization for catalysis. So we know briefly that this passage is going to be about like a biochem passage, enzymes, catalysis. We see Km, Kcat, melting temperature. So we have a good context for what this passage is going to be about. So we'll come up here. What I do is I close my eyes and I take a deep breath and I focus my mind on the context of the passage. So I'll pretend in my brain that I'm pulling out a file cabinet of the enzymes and biochem and ligation and catalysis and Kcat, all those different terms. I'm like envisioning myself pulling them out of my mind, and that allows me to focus on the passage at hand, which greatly improves stamina and greatly reduces test-taking fatigue. So just spend the 5 seconds that it takes to take a deep breath and think about the passage at hand. So focusing on enzymes and biochem. Okay, Let's all read this first paragraph quietly in our heads, and then we'll move on to the first question. And if you've already done this before, again, this is about building good habits. So really, really practice perfect strategy, because strategy is what's going. These good habits that you build are what is going to translate into test taking. So it doesn't matter if you've taken this passage already. You can take it better. You can take it more perfectly. And trust me, you're going to learn something no matter what. So really, really, really put your all into this. Have perfect strategy. And yeah, okay, good luck. Okay, so pretty much get what this first paragraph is saying. There's a homodimeric enzyme. Okay, so again, one tip for you guys, when it comes to critical thinking, something that I do when I read, if you want to be perfect when you read anything, perfect reading requires constant questioning, constant self-awareness of what you're reading at all times. You need to have this little indicator inside of you that basically tells you when you don't understand something. So it's like an alarm bell that goes off in my mind. Every time my brain reads something that doesn't really make sense, I'm fixated on it. Like I know exactly that that's a gap in my knowledge. Because this is all about training, right? So if I can identify the gaps in my knowledge, I can easily fill it. So when you're reading, it's not about just reading and finishing. Don't read for completion, read for understanding. Read so that you're understanding the gaps in your knowledge, because once you understand the gaps, again, you can easily fill those gaps when you drill and practice later on. So when you're reading this, you know, when I read, I'm reading very slowly. I have like my finger tracing the screen, and over time, after the weeks of studying, you get faster and faster and faster, but it's about going at your own pace. It's about really wringing the potential dry from every single passage so that you really are perfect and you build really strong habits that can translate into any test-taking environment. And so if you know, whenever you get like a 515 or 520, which you guys will get, it's not going to be a fluke. It's going to be something that you can repeat and that you have repeated before by building these good habits and giving yourself enough time to build these habits. And that's the key thing. So over here, you see a human acylase -1. So already I'm like, what's going on? You know what I mean? What is an acylase, right? So if you guys know what that is, awesome. If not, then you've identified your first gap. Don't be afraid of it, because this is just training. You're just studying, because you can always put that into your flashcards and study it. Okay, so it's a homodimeric enzyme. Oh, great. So it explains it for us. Well, what does homodimeric enzyme mean? Homodimeric. So essentially, homo, dimeric meaning one, two, homo meaning sort of similar or same. So if you split it down the middle, you have the two dimers and it kind of look the same. That catalyzes the hydrolysis of the terminal peptide bond, hydrolysis. Right, these are terms that if you don't know, those are gaps in your knowledge. You must study them. Anyway, so catalyzes the hydrolysis of the terminal peptide bond in a protein or the hydrolysis of N-acyl amino acids. Catalytic center of this enzyme has been determined by single crystal X-ray diffraction with glycine and co-crystallization aid, as a co-crystallization aid. So if you don't know what this is, again, it's another gap in your knowledge. So just from these first few sentences alone, when we go back and we analyze this passage, we'll really be able to pull out a lot of gaps in our knowledge, and we can then begin to make specific and focused flashcards to make sure that we're not wasting time with we're not wasting time, and so that we can actually make sure that when we're spending time making flashcards and studying those flashcards, that we know exactly what context they can be applied in. Okay, so we've read this, we understand the structure here, we see H, D, E, H, E. If you guys don't know what those are, those would be, amino acids, different residues at different positions. So histidine at position 80, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so we've read that first paragraph. Now let's try to answer the first question. Okay, so this question is asking, why does the proposed mechanism involve? So first of all, we don't know what the proposed exactly. So Josh, you got it right. We need to go back to the passage, but before we do, let's break down what is it that we need to extract from the passage when we go back and read it. What is it that we're reading for? So number one, we need to understand what is the proposed mechanism. So remember, this ties perfectly with the concept of problems having sub-questions, and those sub-questions you can then methodically answer. So this is a problem, and so the first sub-question is, what is the proposed mechanism? And then the second question is, I guess we all know what deprotonation means, so I suppose it's essentially where does deprotonation occur in the proposed mechanism, and what does deprotonation cause in the proposed mechanism? So if we can answer what the proposed mechanism is, where deprotonation occurs, and what it causes, we will be able to answer the question perfectly. So now we're going to go up, and we're going to read the passage only through the paragraph that gives us the answer. So, I'll tell you right now that it's not going to be just here. You're going to have to read through here. So read the next couple paragraphs and then stop, because by that time, I believe you should be able to answer the question. Okay, so what is the answer, guys? What is the answer here? So with every question, so Sandra says C. That is, oh, Josh says B. Okay, so we got some conflict here. So somebody says B, somebody says C. Walter says, I think C. Josh, Sharon, Bianca, Pyle. Bianca says C, C. So, Josh, you kind of singled out here, man. So let's dive back in. So we're looking for proposed mechanism, we're looking for where deprotonation occurs, and we're looking for what deprotonation causes. And Walter says it could be A maybe, but he's not sure. Okay, so we're all kind of sure that it's not going to be D. Oh, interesting. Okay. Sharon, if you want to chime in, definitely love to know your opinion. So over here, the active site consists of two pentacoordinate zinc ions. Pentacoordinate, meaning 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So pentacoordinate zinc ions, and occurs at the dimer interface. Okay. The resting state of the enzyme presumably has a bound water instead of a glycine. So instead of a glycine, the resting state of the enzyme presumably has a bound water. Resting state, that's a term that might be a gap in your knowledge. Possibly you want to study it. The proposed mechanism, okay, ding, 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 here we go. The proposed mechanism of action by H-acyl involves binding of the substrate, so that's step 1, deprotonation of the bound water, okay, by a glutamate at position 147, not shown. So glutamate comes in and deprotonates water. So first of all, we found the proposed mechanism, and then we found where deprotonation occurs. Now all we have to do is answer what that deprotonation causes, and we will be able to answer the question. So first of all, where does deprotonation occur? It occurs on the bound water. So already we will be able to know that it's going to be C, but let's assume that they had more than one answer choice that gave us water. The next question, question number 3, is asking what does that deprotonation cause? Cause of the reacting blah, right? So the reacting water, by being deprotonated, what does that do? So you're pulling, okay, so when you pluck the hydrogen off, right, when you deprotonate this, is that that's going to leave you with OH? And exactly, so Sandra's right. So the OH group is a good nucleophile, so can bind to substrate. So that is the reason why. So when you're deprotonating something, you're basically taking water, which is happy, it's neutral, and you're taking away its a couple of its shared electrons. It's like taking a blanket away from a baby, right? So now it's not going to be very happy. It's going to be very reactive. It's going to want to quickly find a blankie, right? So that's why this OH is going to be more nucleophilic. It's going to be actively seeking. It's going to be actively reactive and seeking something to bind with, so that it can be happy again. Okay, that's basically how that will work. So Yep, that's it. So yeah, essentially, here's the real key, guys. When it came to me answering that question so easily, it's not really about content knowledge. That's secondary. Content knowledge is more supplementary to the overall process of critical thinking and problem solving, which is what I'm trying to teach. And the overall process of critical thinking and problem solving, again, is right here. If you guys can understand and let this concept sink in, you'll be unstoppable. And in this case, it's a skill. It's a skill you have to train, and through your analysis, you'll be able to get better and better and better at identifying the gaps in your knowledge, the questions that you need to answer in order to solve this problem. So that's why immediately I had 3 questions that I needed to answer in order to solve this problem. 1 is, what is the proposed mechanism? 2 is, where does deprotonation occur? And 3 is, what does that deprotonation cause? So we found this. We found that it occurs on the water, and then all we have to know at that point, this is where content comes in, is that we know that it causes the water to become more nucleophilic. So you'll see that the deeper puppet master here is problem solving and less of content knowledge. So content knowledge, I think we've all had this thought where we're like, man, I've reviewed all the content, I know all the content, I've studied all the flashcards, and yet I still get questions wrong. Well, this is the reason why. Because you don't know where and when to apply that content. So get good at this. It's really, really important. Okay, it makes these things kind of seem easy, but it makes these things kind of seem less scary, and that's exactly why I call it the boogeyman method. Because it takes something scary, and then it's like, oh, it's not so bad. So yeah, practice it. It's very important. Okay, next question. If you guys think you can answer it, shoot me the answers in the text. Otherwise, tell me we have to go back up. Okay, back up. All right, now before we go back up, guys, again, let's break this problem down. What are the questions we need to ask in order to answer this question, in order to answer this problem? So the questions, let's see if we can pick out some. Why did the researchers choose A? So first of all, first question I have is, who are these researchers? What's the research? Number 2 is, what does it mean when it refers to A? Like, what is A? As the replacement residue for each of the single site variants used in the study. That's another question I have, like, what is the study? Okay, so in my opinion, after I've broken down this problem and I've understood the gaps in my knowledge, all I do is I take those gaps and I turn them into the form of questions. So I don't know what the researchers are, so that's the first question I have. I don't know what they mean by A, so that's the second question I have. And I don't know what the study is about, so that's the third question I have. Now I've armed myself, I've primed myself to know what I'm looking for when I go back up and read the rest of the passage. I know what it is I'm reading for. And then since I know what it is I'm reading for, the answer will basically pop out to me, and I'll be able to do the same strategy, blah, 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 and get the right answer. So that's the important step that I cannot emphasize enough when approaching these problems. Okay, so who are the researchers? What does A mean? And then what was the study about? And then we can go ahead and answer the last question, which is what replacement. So what did this replacement cause? So what did this replacement cause? Okay, let's go see. We're going to have to read, we're going to have to finish up the passage here. So let's finish up the passage, including reading the table, and then we should be able to understand who the researchers were, what does A mean, what is the study about, and what did the replacement of A for the rest of the stuff cause?
Sound good. You ready to do?
Okay, so did we understand those questions, and are we able to answer it? So yeah, so it says the kinetic parameters of the enzymatically catalyzed reaction of blah 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 were determined. So we're looking for the kinetic parameters were determined for this enzyme as well as 6 different variants. Okay, that's the study. Cool. The data is provided in Table 1, along with melting temperatures for each variant. Fantastic. When the researchers, okay, there's the researchers prepared this, it exhibited below this melting point and did not exhibit any activity. A computer modeling study of this variant showed that the side chain of this was placed in close proximity to that. Okay, I mean, this stuff doesn't really address the questions that we had, but most likely they're going to be questions in different problems are going to ask stuff about this right here. But if you notice that the questions that we were asking, which is again, who these guys are, what A is, what's the study about, and what does replacing, what does a replacement residue cause? So we've determined now that A is actually referring to alanine, right? And so we have the 6 different variants here. And so we have alanine in every single variant. And alanine is substituting for each of those different things. So at position H80, so histidine at position 80 is substituted for an alanine. Aspartic acid at position 113 is substituted for an alanine. Glutamic acid at position 147 is substituted for an alanine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we know that the substitution, the replacement residue, is alanine. So now the last question remains is what does replacing all of these guys right here with alanine do? So we have H, D, and E versus A. This is the last question, and once we understand the answer to this question, we'll be able to pick out the right answer. So what is the difference between H, D, and E as compared to to alanine? What would be the difference? Charged amino acids to nonpolar, not charged side chain. Okay. Okay. Less steric hindrance. That's always a popular one. Less steric hindrance. Any other ideas for the differences between alanine and the rest of those guys? Any ideas? Alanine similar to glycine. Okay. Okay, so it looks like that's all we got. So let's see. So usage of alanine as a replacement, why did they choose it for the study? Why did they choose it for the study? Okay. Okay, let's see. So reduces the net charge. Let's bracket these things. So charged to uncharged. So we're seeing people are basically saying charged to uncharged and less steric hindrance. So essentially, sorry, I'm gonna have to mute. I'm not sure if that's you, Walter, but let me just mute you guys. There we go. Okay. So, oh, it is you, Walter. Okay, cool. So, yeah, so we understand, no worries. So we understand that the difference between HD and E versus A is a couple of things. We've got size and charge, basically. So that's our answer choice here. So we know that they're going to be using alanine because of its difference in size and its difference in charge. So overall, the correct answer is going to deal with something about these guys right here. It's going to relate to how they're different in size and charge. Now, what did the differences in size and charge entail? What do they imply about the behavior of those new single site variants? What does it imply? If there's less charge, basically no charge, and there's less steric hindrance, how is that going to affect the activity? Better binding? I don't think it would be better binding if, yeah, Josh, you got it right. It's actually going to reduce the interactions. So, first of all, alanine, like there's going to be less steric hindrance means that the interactions, there's more of a distance between the residues of the different side chains. And charges allow for a lot more interactions. And if something doesn't have a charge, and if it's at a site where there was charge before, that's again going to reduce the interactions overall as well. So the broader principle behind a decrease in steric hindrance and a reduction of, well, basically a lack of charge, it's going to reduce the interactions between. So it's not going to actually increase the binding necessarily, and we'll be able to see that from the data in the chart, which we'll tackle in a second. But yeah, Josh, you're right. It reduces the reactions overall. So yeah, D is the answer for that. And that's basically it. So it's so difficult. It's so easy to get caught in the noise of answers and questions, and you think about what you think the MCAT wants you to answer, and all these different content comes flushing through your mind. But when you methodically break down the problem into its sub-questions, and you just train yourself to discover the gaps in your knowledge, you can then again systematically go one by one and answer each question that you come up with. So Pyle is asking, why is A wrong? So usage of alanine reduces the net charge on the bimetallic center. The net charge on the bimetallic center. So why do you think that is correct? What is it about that statement that's going to answer the question about why they chose to use A as a replacement residue? Because we are going from a charged amino acid to an uncharged amino acid. Okay. Some of those amino acids are positive and some are negative, so changing alanine won't necessarily reduce net charge, but it will change its interactions. Does that answer your question, Pyle? Great job, Sandra. Thank you. Fantastic. Yeah, so overall the net charge, I believe, what does it say? Yeah. Yeah, there's no real, because it's homodimeric, essentially right here, we'd be able to see a net charge. So there's no net charge anyways. And so when you're replacing something which has no net charge, and you're adding in amino acids and residues and side chains that also are chargeless, it won't reduce the net charge. So D is correct there. Now we have 10 minutes, so let's quickly get through. I think we have 1, 2, 3, 4 questions left, so let's get through those. Okay. Based on the results of the kinetic studies and the observed melting point, what is the best conclusions regarding the role of the metal centers in catalysis and enzyme conformational stability? So essentially, the question's asking what's the point of, or does zinc A and zinc B have roles in catalysis and conformational stability? Do they both have roles in it? Is it one or the other? So what do we know about the metal centers? Catalysis. So remember, again, what do we know about the metal centers? We know they are homodimeric. That's the only thing we know, right? So remember the principle of MSLR. The question is asking us, based on the results of the kinetic studies and the observed TM, what is the best conclusion regarding the role of metal centers in catalysis? So first of all, we know that because they're penta something, because we know they're homodimeric, we know that the properties of the metal centers are not going to be different. So it's either C or D. So we can cross off A and B, but it's either C or D. The question is becoming, do these metal centers, are they involved in catalysis, and do they provide conformational stability? So we have two questions here. What does it mean to be involved in catalysis? And what does it mean to provide conformational stability, right? Those would be the gaps in our knowledge right now, I suppose. What does it mean to be involved in catalysis? And what does it mean to provide conformational stability? We already know that they're both going to act the same way because they're homodimeric. But what does it mean to provide conformational stability? And what does it mean to be involved in catalysis? So basically the study was changing different side positions, different side chains that were listed up here, right? What we saw was that the melting temperature of the wild type, so we have the data for the wild type, so this is how it looks like for the wild type. Now, the KCAT, what happens here? The KCAT, it pretty much decreases. And when KCAT decreases, that means that 1/seconds decreases, which means that the seconds that it takes for the enzyme, for the reaction to go, increases. So it's becoming less efficient. It's taking longer to go. So we know that these variants are causing it to be less efficient. Okay. So we know there's a change there. We know that over here, Km, it kind of fluctuates. You know, it kind of goes up and down. So there's some sort of stability here. And with melting temperature, so we got pretty much a general decrease except for E147A, which is described over here. But any ideas as to whether or not the metal centers would be involved in catalysis and would provide conformational stability? Any ideas? Any thoughts or reasoning behind whether or not you think they would be part of it? I mean, just from the structure alone, you can posit that it provides some sort of a conformational stability, right? And is it involved in? Can you repeat KCAT and its relationship for an overall reaction? Yeah. So KCAT is defined as the units are 1/seconds, meaning that it is it's a coefficient that describes the efficiency of a reaction. So if something's more efficient, it will take less time to react. If something's less efficient, it will take more time to react. So if you look at the data, the coefficient is decreasing in size as compared to the wild type. So if this is decreasing, if this overall thing is decreasing, that means it's getting less efficient because it's taking more time. Josh says, if changing the amino acid makes it less efficient, would this make structure stability important? Yes. Walter says, I think it impacts both catalysis and stability. Why do you think that? For both ions. Both ions. Yes, so the question is, why? Now, that's something to ponder now, okay? Because I want to make sure we wrap up the other questions, but because it deflates from the wild type. Yes, it does. It absolutely does. So as we can tell, basically, the efficiency goes down. Because the efficiency goes down, we can imagine that there is some sort of a change in catalysis. However, because there is also some sort of consistency with Km, we can posit that there is still maintaining some semblance of stability, is the interpretation I got from this graph. Scale of 1 to 10, how confusing is that? How is Km consistent? So if you look at the wild type, it's 0.43, right? And you look at some of the variants, and they seem to be what I mean by consistent, I mean like it's not consistently higher. It's not consistently very high as compared to the wild type. It goes from 0.43 to 2, back down to 0.57 to 2.8 to 3 to 0.71 to 2.8. So I mean that it's inconsistent, which tells me that there is some stability still being maintained in the overall H-acyl enzyme. So let's write this guy down as being something to research outside. So the answer is C. Yes, the answer is C. But let's keep going, and then I'll come back to this. What is the best explanation? The best explanation for the observed behavior of the E147D variant. So again, the question that we need to understand is, what was the observed behavior? That's the first question we need to understand. But based upon that observed behavior, we'll have other questions. So we look at the E147D behavior, and remember it says that when the researchers prepared an E147D variant, it exhibited a melting temperature far less than 37 degrees Celsius and did not exhibit any activity. A computer modeling study of this variant showed that the side chain was placed in close proximity of D348. Okay, so we model the enzyme, right? Okay, so let's look at right here. Let's look at right here. This will be 147. This position is 147 over here. And this position over here, we'll call that 348. Okay? So the first question is saying, what was the observed behavior? Well, the observed behavior was that it exhibited a lower melting temperature, right? So what does a lower melting temperature mean? It means that it's easier to melt. The bonds are easier to break, correct? Less stable, exactly. Easier to break, requires I think more accurately, Walter, is that it requires less energy to break the bond. Okay? To denature, I suppose. It requires less energy to break the bonds. So, and it didn't exhibit any activity. So the next question is why? What about this position yielded that was exactly easy to lose structure? So luckily the next sentence tells us what's going on. So if you look at this diagram right here, you'll see that this 147D, okay, this E147D is basically replacing the E with a D. And so you replace it with a D and you put it next to another D, right? The D and the D are going to basically repel each other. So there's going to be a repulsive interaction that reduces the conformation stability and thus enzymatic activity. So because essentially the observed behavior was that it was a decrease in melting point, that decrease in melting point tells us that there's a decrease in conformational stability. It makes it easier for it to break apart. And the reason why is because the computer modeling showed us that these two Ds were now placed essentially right next to each other. And that's going to cause some repulsive interactions, which, et cetera, et cetera. I think that hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Gotta move a little bit quickly. Assuming binding is fast relative to subsequent catalytic steps, what relative effect does substituting the various active site residues have on catalysis versus substrate binding? The various substitutions affect blank and blank. So essentially this question is asking, what do these substitutions have? What effect do these substitutions have on KCAT and KM? And we've already answered that question. We saw that it greatly reduces KCAT, but it only slightly increases KM, right? Because it's not very consistent. It does, overall it increases it, but it's not such a dramatic change as it is with KCAT. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. And so as a result, it's going to affect catalytic turnover more than substrate binding. So again, this is the principle of MSLR. We just straight up looked at the graph, looked at the data table, and we just described what's happening. KCAT is catalytic turnover, and it's affecting it much more drastically than it's affecting the substrate binding, which is represented by KM. That's why it's B. Here. Last one, the reacting substrate carbon atom. In the mechanism described in the passage, undergoes which of the following hybridization state changes during the reaction? Note the middle hybridization state refers to an intermediate. Okay, so my question is again, what is the reacting substrate carbon atom in the mechanism? Okay, what is the reacting substrate mechanism? So we have, the mechanism is right here, right? We have glutamate, we have water, we have, what is it that we're looking for? The reacting substrate carbon atom in the mechanism described in the passage undergoes which of the following hybridization state changes during the reaction? So, anybody have any ideas? So Josh says B. So essentially, what is the reacting substrate carbon atom in the mechanism described above? What is the initial hybridization? Is it sp2 or sp3? The initial one. sp2 or sp3? Which carbon atom are we even talking about? So it's talking about the proposed mechanism. Okay, so where's the proposed? Yeah, so it's glutamate. So what does glutamate look like? Okay, so is it sp2 or is it sp3, that carbon atom? sp2, exactly. Yes, it's sp2. So Josh, that's why, good job Bianca, yes, so it's sp2. So that's why, and sp2 very simply, you figure it out, you got here, 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 whatever, right? So this is the carbon we're talking about. All you need to do is just count how many atoms and or lone pairs surround it. So you got 1, 2, 3. So that's sp2. Okay, and so then what happens is, again, that water is deprotonated, then the OH as a nucleophile is going to come on here, right? It's going to go like that. It's going to kick up this double bond over here. Then you're going to get the middle hybridization state refers to an intermediate. So the intermediate is going to look like that, and then that, and then that, right? So this is going to be sp2 or sp3, because we have 1, 2, 3, sp3, exactly. So it's going to go sp2 to sp3 because it has 4, right, S and then 3 P's. And then what's going to happen is this guy's going to come back down. It's going to kick off a leaving group. Right? It's going to kick off a leaving group. And then we're going to be back with sp2. So the answer in this case is not B, it is actually A. Okay. Great job, guys. I know we're a little bit over time, so okay, that is essentially it. So now from here, what you would do is when you're going back over these types of passages, and by the way, this is going to be found in the AAMC section bank. If you haven't seen it already, I believe it is, I don't know if I wrote it down. Didn't write it down, but it's a physical science section bank passage. You'll be able to find it on there. And when you're going over this passage, guys, when you're analyzing it, remember that you're analyzing it for all these different checklists. You're You're asking yourself, did I read for understanding and not completion? Did I draw any flowcharts for key relationships? Did I pay attention to the question stem? Use bracketing, MSLR? Did it come with S choice E? All these different things are very important to understand and to analyze why you get a question right or wrong. Okay? So when it comes to content, all these different pieces of content can be dropped in this study bucket, and you're basically going to go and you're going to ask yourself one question. In order to find out what you need to study from this passage, just ask yourself one question. And that question is, in hindsight, what information, if any, would have helped me understand the passage, questions, or answer choices? And that's it. What information, in any. If you want even a simpler question, it is, what are the gaps in my knowledge from this passage? And every single gap in your knowledge, it's going to be added to the study bucket here. So you're going to basically split this screen in half, look at the passage on one screen, look at the bucket on the other screen, and you're going to say, okay, this was, date is 8/27, test location is section, bank, passage, let's say it's 5, I don't remember. And then the questions that you're going to add, you're going to ask are basically this. You're going to turn in all those gaps in your knowledge into forms of questions. So, what does penta coordinate, mean? Or how does changing side chain from H, D, and E to A affect the position, right? Things like that, right? Things that you can turn into questions that are very specific and focused questions. Each of these questions get their own flashcard. What is the structure of glutamate or something, or you can even say, what is the hybridization of glutamate, right? Things like that. So once you list out all these questions, you then take these questions, open up your Quizlet, and turn them into flashcards. And that is essentially going to be the organization phase. And then once you're done with organization, you're going to go ahead and hit drill on Quizlet. So you're going to I think on Quizlet it's called the write function. They changed it. It used to be called learn. Now it's called write function on Quizlet. And you're just going to test it. Go round by round and try to answer all these questions. And then once you're done with that, go right back and set another 7-8 hours for practicing as many passages as you can get done, and so on and so forth until you take your exam. So that's basically, yeah, they've got some new algorithm crap now, yeah. Anyway, so that's basically it. Hopefully this was useful. If you have any questions, email me, text me, bug me. Email's here, website's here, phone number, you guys, some of you have. I think all of you have them actually. But if you need them, my number you can text is here. So yeah, appreciate you guys hopping on. I'm going to stop the recording here.